Without further ado, I'd like to kickstart today's session on mastering design thinking for product management that is going to be led by Piyush, who is the head of product and engineering at SleepyCat. We're so pleased to have you join us this evening, Piyush.
Hi guys. So guys, hope you will enjoy the session and I hope you learn a lot. I'll be open for QA throughout the session also if it's more relevant to the slide, and we'll be having a full-blown QA session at the end also. So not to worry, if you just need to ask anything, you can surely do at any point of time. Sure. I think a lot of you might have heard about design thinking in product management. You might have learned about it, or you might have just heard about it, doesn't matter. It's a very easy thing to understand. We might have encountered it in our daily lives, and we might have applied it somewhere too, but when it comes to product management, a lot of people still choose the traditional methods. Uh, but design thinking is something which could prove very, very valuable to all of us. So it's a kind of a new approach to product management. As of now, in most of the traditional approaches, the thing is the focus is primarily on the business outcomes. The focus is also on just finding the easiest solution to build, and focus is also on what could be built based on simple data and facts. But there's one element missing, which is usually solved by the design thinking process, which is the user empathy and the user interaction. As of till now, most of the whenever you start working on a product management, you focus on how we can provide more business value. It could be like say how we can generate more revenue. It could be let's say how we can generate more sign-ups. But how many of us think about generating more user value? How we could provide more valuable to the users instead of directly focusing on the business goal. Because providing value to the user is should be our primary business goal, right? That in turn helps businesses in the long run. If the user is happy, our businesses will stay there for the long period. We can generate more revenue because the user is happy. They will bring in more users by word of mouth or just by reviews and ratings, a lot of other stuff. Right. So now we'll start the design thinking in detail. I think Lean has already mentioned about me. I'm currently head of product and engineering at SleepyCat. It's a D2C firm built based focused on sleep solutions like mattress, beddings, pillows, etc. I'm also a former entrepreneur. I have keen interest in experimentation and storytelling. That's why design thinking is one process which is very close to me, and I always try to find new ideas or work on that. So, what exactly is design thinking? Right? So, design thinking is more of a human-centric approach to the traditional methods we choose, something which I mentioned very recently. For every method, instead of just data and facts which are presented to you or any random idea that comes up to you, you focus on how we could solve it better for a user. Basically, what will user think about it? It's more of a human-centered approach to the traditional processes of product management, where we can identify what the real problem is. Instead of just we have the problem in mind, we have to create a solution. No, that's the most simplest and traditional approach. Here, the first thing is how we can define the real problem so that whatever we are solving, it provides real value to the user, right? And why it's important? So instead of just building stuff randomly, it fosters innovation. It enhances product quality because you're going deep into the problem, trying to solve something which is actually present, not just based on your assumptions and just the facts presented to you, and not something you understood from the customer. Also, if you understand the real problem, you can create a real solution out of it. So it also reduces the failure risk, right? Because the solution is more closer to what the user requires, right? So there are basically, if we define design thinking, we can divide it into five stages, right? First is empathize, where we have to gain a deep understanding of user needs, experiences, challenges, right? It's similar to what we do in a regular product management thing, but more human centric, where we collect data by talking to customers, having a customer interaction based on surveys, or directly calling them, or collecting data from different touch points, like let's say a customer experience team, or different events you have set up for tracking, but in a more human-centric way, where you ask certain set of questions in terms of human psychology, like how they behave, what will they do in certain situations, and all. We'll go deep into all these things later in the presentation. Second, once you have emphasized or asked us all the set of questions, you define the problem. You clearly articulate what the problem is, what you're trying to solve. Without the data, you won't have a very niche problem to solve. Right? Third would be ideate. Once you have identified what the actual problem is, next it you define a range, creative solutions. You define a number of different solutions. It those could be any type of solutions. It could be a very bad solution also. Just as many solutions as possible you have to create so that nothing should be missed. The next stage is prototyping stage. In prototyping stage, you have to develop a quite tangible representation of ideas, which means uh, it should be, have you heard about MVP, right? So the minimum viable product. So that once you create that minimum product, you again go to the users and understand if something you're building is right or not. Because design thinking is a very iterative process. It doesn't work like a traditional approach where you just complete all the steps and then you have to start again. In design thinking, you can go back to any stage at any point of time. If let's say there's a new insight, right? So you can just keep on switching between the stages based on what new data or what new information from the users you get. So you can switch between prototypes and based on the new user information, new insights, and any kind of other information you get. And finally, it's testing the hypothesis. So whenever in a prototype you share it with customers, you will get a certain set of feedbacks from the users, from different stakeholders, and everything. Uh, you can test it out and make changes, and again go back to the prototyping stage. So overall, design thinking is more or less a very iterative process. It's not a very fixed, let's say, what similar to a waterfall model or agile model, but it's more of an iterative. You can skip between stages. You can go back to any stage at any point of time, right? So before we jump into all the stages again, I just want to deep dive on why it matters once more. So why design thinking is very, very important. It's an important thing in itself, understanding the importance of design thinking. So first is user-centric products. Whenever you want to build products, it's not just for generating revenue, which is obviously the important main goal for any business. But if you are not very user-centric, that revenue goal or let's say subscription goal or all those goals will not be achieved for a very longer period. You cannot sustain those goals if the product is not very user centric. You might have experienced if you do not like a product, you do not subscribe or you just find an alternative which suits you more, right? Next is enhanced collaboration. So instead of let's say only one person as in traditional process where let's say one person is working on one side of things, For example, a product manager is working on defining the PRD, then it passes on all the information to UX team, design, or the layouts and everything, and then to engineering and then testing to build the stuff. But in a design thinking process, you get ideas from all across the team. Each and every person in the team, whether it's a product manager or a UX person or an engineering person, they each and everyone contributes to the idea. They talk to the users, they understand the user's process, everything. So that's why the collaboration increases between different people. So at that point of time, you might have seen in traditional process there are a lot of conflicts, as mentioned earlier, because each person is assigned task one by one, and they have a different perspective on the project at once. They might not they might not be on the same page for all the ideas, but during this process, because they are discussing ideas, everybody is just sharing their opinion, and the final idea is more of a collective approach. So there are less conflicts, and the product build is very smooth, right? Because everybody understand what they are building. They have a very similar perspective, which because they were brought on the same page before they finally started building something actually, right? Next would be reduce risk because you are validating it iteratively, continuously taking feedback at every stage, going back to previous stages if you have got the new feedback. Also, as I previously mentioned, everybody is on the same page, so it reduces the risk of failure because you are validating ideas continuously through user feedback and iterative testing, right? And last, business or success. As I mentioned earlier, if you're building user-centric products, if users are loving your product and they are they continue to use it for a longer period of time, your business success goals will also be met. Uh, According to some studies, the companies which uses design thinking, they outperform industry peers by 228% because of the reasons mentioned above. Right. I think before we deep dive into the stages, I think we have some things in the chat. Uh, Lynn, can you guys see my screen? I think I can see some comments on the chat. Is the screen being refreshed? Okay, I can see a yes. So can just few more people confirm whether just able to see the screen?
Hey, hi Piyush. Yeah, this is absolutely visible. No worries.
Sure, sure. I think I saw comments. Yeah, Purnima, it's why design thinking matters. We are on that screen now. We'll proceed.
Awesome. Yeah.
Continuing. Okay, so the first stage in design thinking is empathy, which is also the most important stage, and this is the stage which makes this process unique. Other stages are more similar to the traditional product management also, but this is the stage which is very, very important for design thinking. The reason being, as I mentioned earlier, why is design thinking important or what is design thinking? This stage is where the human-centered iterative approach comes to play, where you ask users a lot of questions instead of just deep diving into the data. You try to empathize with user, you try to understand their point of view. There you try to understand how they are using the product and what are their exact needs. So that's why this seems to be the most important stage in design thinking because you are at this point of time talking to a actual human and understanding the problem in real, not just assuming the problem it is or just based on the data you are making some changes. This is the first stage which makes a design thinking process different from other processes: human empathy or human interaction. So how you can conduct this stage? You can conduct direct interviews with the users one-on-ones, or you can do group interviews. You can do surveys, or you can observe around by using, let's say, heat maps or scroll maps, what users are clicking on the website, what's the funnels, what are users scrolling up to. So all these things you can observe on the website, or you can also just hand it over to, let's say, a group of users in a lab, or you can just stand behind them and observe how they are using the website or a software. So that's one way. Using empathy maps to step into the user shoes. You can ask a number of questions. Let's say if you want to deep dive into any solution, you want to find RC for any of the solutions, you have to ask a number of questions. So basically, there's one technique called five whys, five level of whys. For each question, you ask a why, or at least five times, so that you can get into the actual problem. So you will be able to understand. For example, if you want to understand why a system crashed, you have to understand why. Maybe it's a power rating, but why it overheated? Maybe electricity issue. Why was there an electricity? So you go five level down. You have to ask why type of questions five times. So that's how you can understand the real problem in a better way. Example, let's say if you're designing a fitness app, you will talk to users. What are their struggles? What are the challenges you face? Why do they give up? What kind of exercise do they do? At what time of the day? Why they are doing specific exercises, or why they want to do the exercise now? Are there any health problems they face? What kind of users do which type of exercises for health problems? You can ask any number of questions until and unless you are very, very sure of what you are trying to solve, till the point of time where you can get all the possible answers you want to understand from the user. So this is called empathy in design thinking. Just to understand the user psychology, user behavior regarding to what problem you are trying to solve. Right. Now, defining the problem. So one problem is you have to build a fitness app. That's it. You can build, let's say, a yoga app, or you can build a regular exercise app. That's it. That's a traditional problem. You have to build something. Now, if you have to define the problem using design thinking, you have to be more sure on why you are building this app and for what users. If you are building a general fitness app, it's flood. Those type of apps have flooded the app store or market. There are lot of such apps on the available. But if you want to be successful in that and launching your app, you have to be solving real user problems. For example, one of the example is, let's say you are creating a app for busy professionals where you have to fit quick workouts in their day because they struggle with time management. They do not have 1 hour to go to the, let's say, a gym. They do not even have, let's say, an hour or two in the day or the evening uh, at home to do the workout. What you can do is you can, so let's say, create a simple app where you can provide short durations of exercises they can do at different type points of time. Let's say few chair extension exercise at home, or at office, or let's say a quick 5 minute workout in the morning and an HITA workout in the evening. You have to be very, very specific what users you are building for. Clearly define the states. Once you have interviewed the users in the previous stage, you have to niche it down to a very basic level to what type of user and what kind of problem you are solving for. Building a basic app is very easy. You have a very clear idea, but that might or might not solve the problem for everybody. So this is called defining the clear problem, right? Moving on, the next is ideation stage. You can use a number of techniques for ideation. One of the things I mentioned, like brainwriting, where Each person writes their ideas and share them, and you discuss each and every idea, find common ideas out of them. And let's say even if some idea is unique, you discuss it with all the people and find the real problem out of it, right? So it's more like collaboration and getting to understand the user. It's not just different data points. Brainwriting is just collaborative idea discussion kind of thing, right? Scamper is another kind of addition technique. It's a slightly advanced technique where you can just substitute with existing ideas, create a substitutes of them, combine all of them, and then adapt accordingly. But needs thing should be put in the app, what should be kept out of the app. It's a more complex process in the system, and left for, let's say, if the system is already built and you just want to improve it further. And last is worst possible ideas. This is something I love to do in general also. So whenever I try to think of an idea, I think of all the possibilities. I doesn't matter how worse it is, because when I go through in that direction, the one thing that happens is um, there are certain things which I won't even think of uh, on regular days, because probably I'm working on e-commerce right now, so I might have some ideas which will be based out of my bias, what's happening in the industry, what has happened in the past. But if I think of worst possible ideas, I don't know how I may come up with something which is very unique and could be very helpful for me. And it will also lead me to, let's say, other better ideas which I would fail to explore in, or let's say, a regular setting. Because whenever you work in product management or any other field, there are certain biases that comes into play, right? Uh, let's say you are working in fintech. You know, this is how a certain process works. This, for example, let's say this is how a loan is processed. This is how a user usually signs up for a loan. This is how usually users start getting into stock market and all of that stuff. But with worst possible idea, I can just, it will give me a different branches to explore, right? So whenever you try to do some ideation, just think of any kind of ideas and start noting it down. You can come back to it later when you are just finalizing or defining the idea finally. But whenever, one example could be, let's say, if we are trying to search something on the internet, we go into internet, we search about something, then you read the article, then there is a related article at the bottom, which is it's not exactly the same article, but slightly different, and which would extend the current article, let's say, or the current idea. And 2 hours later, you are basically just exploring the internet, and you are now mastering quantum physics in 2 hours. You just keep exploring things one by one. One idea leads to another. So that's how the design thinking also works. Next is rapid prototyping. So till now, ideation stage is good and all of okay, but if you don't turn into execute it or don't turn into actual prototype for a product, it's of no use. Ideas are good, but if they are just stuck in your brain and not coming to real world, nobody knows about it. Non Doesn't matter how great your idea is. If you can turn into your product, there's no use of it, right? So, as you mentioned earlier, rapid prototyping is one way where you could just turn those ideas into reality. And just with simple rapid prototyping, you can iterate on it continuously to improve upon it. For example, you can turn it into a prototype using several methods. You can just draw a sketch on paper. You can create a wireframe using a tool like Besmek, or you could create a proper high fidelity prototype using, let's say, a tool like Figma or a Canva, right? But the thing is, it should come into start shaping up into reality very quickly. You don't have to just build a complete, let's say, a Microsoft Office solution within a day. You just have to create one screen. This is, let's say, you're creating Microsoft Docs. You just have to create a simple screen that this is the text area where I edit things. This is a simple toolbar area where we could just do a simple text editing. Start with that. You don't have to create a lot of features into that. You don't have to add a, let's say, a language check or a spelling check on the first day. You don't have to add a lot of designing on the first day. You just start by creating simple prototypes. Validate it, good, proceed to the next stage. Start building more and more features like that. Okay. Then testing and feedback. So as you are working in product manager, I think one of the most important thing you might be doing is A/B testing. You always want to test what's working for you, what's not working for you. Maybe let's you build something, it's working, but it could be better. Or if you change something, it could become worse. So you have to constantly check what's working for you, what's not. So it could be A/B test, or you can do split URL testing, testing same variations with minor modifications, which is A/B test. Or you could just do basically complete split URL, split testings where you are testing two completely different variations of the same system. But the main thing is you have to test continuously. It's not you have built something, you have A/B tested or twice or thrice, and you're done with it. We've built a website, do A/B test every month. One A/B test or two A/B tests every month. Let's say if you're, for example, if you're building a e-commerce website, test your product page variations every month, once a month. Check your cross-sell every month. Identify issues in checkout very frequently. What's working, which user fields users are filling out, which are not. Basically, you have to be continuously doing testing. You cannot leave the product once you built it. That's it. Because a product manager's life doesn't end just at building stuff. They're also responsible for the success of it. Because if you don't know whether it's working or not and you just built it, you will not be able to learn anything after all. You will not be able to provide success to your business, and you won't be able to provide value to the user. So testing and feedback is one method which is common to traditional also, but it's given more important design thinking, where it's very iterative here. You have to do continuous A/B testing. You have to continuously take surveys. You have to continuously do user testing. So this is one of the most important things in design thinking. Be iterative to ideas, be iterative for testing, be iterative to collaborations. You just have to be very active on that. So there are certain challenges also. It's not design thinking sounds very good. It's a process which has changed the industry. As mentioned in one of the slides, the companies which use design thinking are provide 228% better revenue than their competitors. But it also comes with its own challenges. So no process, in fact, also design thinking, including uh, comes up without challenges. So there, I'll just discuss the challenges part right now. Yeah, the first is resistance from team. So as I mentioned in traditional ones, everybody was there has their role predefined. That as a product manager will define this, do this. As a UX person, I'll just design the things. Engineering, I'll just code up the things. I'll just have to focus on how we can build it. But in design thinking part, everybody has to collaborate for the idea. Everybody has to be on the same page. They have to do a lot more work than in a traditional approach, right? And the major resistance comes from the stakeholders because at that point you are not directly focusing on the business goals, but you are focusing on the user value right now. Let's say if I go to my CEO right now, okay, I have to provide better value to the users. Um, or I would should give one more example. Let's say Zerodha. So I think some of you might be using Zerodha for investments. So they came up with one feature called nudges. where they will give you a nudge or a notification whenever there's when you are trying to invest in penny stocks, or whenever there is some bad incident happened with some stock. So do you think it's a good idea for a business goal to provide nudges? Because then users will not trade in those stocks, or they won't invest in those mutual funds, right? Because you are giving them a warning that these are not good stocks, but they are helping users instead, right? They are asking users not to invest, which is completely opposite to what a primary business metric for a company like Zerodha or their application Kite is. But a lot of companies do not think like that. The primary focus is business goal, generate as much revenue as we can get, or as much subscribers as we can get. But so there's a lot of resistance that will come from stakeholders also, not just the teams because they have to do more work, but from stakeholders because they have to do they have to affect the business goals also. Because instead of that, you are focusing on providing user values, right? I think someone raised the hand. If we can take up a question, Vishal, I think we should take one question
Yeah,
straight
yeah, of
in the
course,
middle
of
of the
course.
slide.
Just let me. Can you raise your hand?
I think one user did right now.
I'm unable to see it on the attendees.
Okay, I think I'm sorry if you pronounce the name wrong. Ajoke Aid. I'm I think he left. Sure, no worries. We'll continue.
We can take the questions later on, Piyush.
Sure.
I will keep the monitoring. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I'll carry on. Okay. So the solutions for this approach is we have to communicate the value of user-centric design very, very clearly to the users. For example, if you are taking a user-centric decision, you have to be very clear the idea, the problem you have defined in the previous stages. It should be very, very clear that why you are providing this. It might impact the business goals directly as of now, but in long term, it might be helping those business goals also. So you have to be very clear why this will help your users, why they will, why it will help your users to stay loyal with you, right? Next would be to back your ideas with data. I know in traditional sense, data is very important. It is also very, very important in design thinking. So if mixed with human-centric approach or human empathy, the data, the overall solution becomes very, very powerful, right? Because no, users will say a lot of things. They might, but use the system differently. You might have a data about it, how users are actually using the system, maybe by tracking the events or maybe by tracking the heat maps or the scroll data. If you combine both the things and find out actual problem, that will be very, very helpful. Because a lot of time happens that if you ask a user how did they use the product or what features they want in the product, you tend to get a lot of different information, which is probably very different from how they actually use the product. They might want a feature, but when say we launch that feature, the most of the users don't use it, right? So a mixture of both data along with your human empathy or human information, the combination of both is very, very important, and that will help you overcome the challenges of design thinking or the risk of resistance from stakeholders and everyone, right? So I'll cover two, three examples. I'll also share some of them while discussing the QA. Right. So once the Apple iPhone's design. So I think most of us know that Apple iPhone was one of the first smartphones, or let's say, but for one of the first touchscreen phones, right? But traditional smartphones before the iPhone had very complex menus. You might have seen BlackBerry with a bigger keypad. It was, you can say, very fancy, but it was not very functional. And user interfaces were very bad. You might have used a lot of Nokia phones or Symbian phones. So the user interfaces were not very friendly. They were just what was built by the different companies. So there was no standardization. There was no, let's say, an app list of apps like we have right now, or simple menu bar in the button or a simple home button. Most of the phones right now have a very similar design, a standard design across phones. There might be difference in basic user interface, but user experience is mostly same across all the phones. So before that, it was not the case. Every kind of phone, whether it's BlackBerry, then there was Nokia. Every phone has a different type of keypad, different type of interface. Some works with touch, but the more or less the thing is, it was very very complex to use. Because if you switch from one phone to another, it was, you can say, a steep learning curve. If you, let's say, you would want to try to install something new on the app, or you want something new in the system, let's say new app or new music, it was not very easy task to do, right? So Apple needed to create a device that was both groundbreaking and user friendly. Groundbreaking in terms of, they brought touch screen or a smartphone with a proper operating system into a phone, and user friendly because they brought a lot of gestures in the system, simple touches, a very minimal kind of design. If you have used Apple, you might not. It's a very minimal design, right? So those minimal design, simple gestures, those were very very user friendly. Whenever you whenever you buy a new phone, just getting the hang of it is not very complex these days, right? And surprisingly, as I mentioned, the Apple was the first touch phone. It's wrong. It was Microsoft. They bought their first touch phone in around 2001, but it was way ahead of the market and it was not very user friendly kind of thing. They had a touchscreen, but still it was not as simple as an iPhone was. So that's why it was not popular. In fact, a lot of people do not even remember that. But it was 6 years earlier than Apple, and it was kind of not worth remembering because there was not a design thought process. No, nobody knew it was coming. There was not a thought put into that. It was just a new technology, so they just implemented it. Right. So I'll just define the stages of design thinking with the example I just mentioned. For example, Apple observed how people struggled with the existing spot. They identified pain points, which I mentioned earlier. The complicated interfaces, aesthetic appeal was lacking. Like I mentioned, in earlier phones, most of we were using Nokia's, where if let's say we have to press a character, sometimes we have to press a single button 2 to 3 times, and there were a lot of mistakes and autocorrects we need to do. So that was one of the issues. BlackBerry keyboard, it was a full keyboard, but very small one. Most of the people could make mistakes typing using a BlackBerry because the keys were very small. So there were a lot of complexities in that phone. So they talked to users, they understood what users were trying to do, what were the pain points in other phones. So they understood they had the complete understanding at the end of the stage how user wants, how easy it should be, what are the challenges others have are facing right now. Right. Now, so at the next stage, they defined the problem. The problem was very simple, how we can create a smartphone that anyone can use intuitively, which should be very, very simple to use, and there should be not a steep learning curve when someone buys an iPhone. Right. Right. So next stage was ID. Touchscreen. Touchscreen was definitely any day more friendly than the keywords we were using. So they use a virtual keyboard. So we can switch between as we can have as many keys as possible, not just the alphanumeric keys, all the symbol keys. Now we had emojis. We can just on the keyboard we have GIFs, emojis, and whatnot these days, right? and intuitive gestures like sliding back and forth, sliding up and down to change, move between the apps, or sliding left and right to move between the screens. So all of these gestures simple because those are very simple. A lot of hand movement and all of these are just in our subconscious. We do a lot of tasks to, let's say, flipping a page of paper or flipping a pages of the book. We just move the fingers left and right, and that's it. If we are exploring through cards, we just move our fingers up and down. It's these are some of the gestures we also use in real life in different scenarios, and that is something which Apple came up with within their phone system, right? So they made it as human as possible. That's what their primary idea is, right? So while users were testing, they built multiple prototypes to test how users interacted with multi-touch screen. They gave devices to all their employees. They gave the devices to different set of users also in the real world. They tested it iteratively. They did the test thousands and thousands of times before finally launching it in the market. It's not just that they built something and directly into the system. They built, tested it thousands of times, not just let's say 5 times or 10 times, just thousand repeated iterations until they were completely sure that this would be a game changer, right? And yeah, this is how an Apple iPhone is what you are seeing right now. It's the most sought after phone in terms of usability, in terms of its aesthetics, in terms of its functionality also, based on how they thought about it. Basically, their whole design thinking process. That's how. That's why you see Apple iPhone now being the most popular one and most sought after thing on the planet right now. Right? It disrupted the complete mobile market, and I think over 2 billion iPhones have been sold since its launch, which is a humongous number. Considering that till few years ago, more than half the population didn't even had phones with them. And so 2 billion phones. Now people are running to stores whenever there's a new iPhone version comes up. I think a lot of you can see people started lining up to Apple stores uh, 2 days before the launch. They just sleep there, eat there in front of an Apple store. So that's the craze of Apple phone. That's how good the product they have built, and it's all because of design thinking process, right? I'll give one more example, and I think this is also one of the companies which some of you might have used while traveling, Airbnb, and I think probably all of you might have heard about it, right? So when they launched, I think we might have heard about their growth story, where initially they were not getting leads, so they started posting on Craigslist. This is one of the common stories which everybody has heard. They have read different case studies about it, that they how they leverage Craigslist. But within their software, there's one process which is not very popular, but the which we can say was more and more one of the most important factors for their success was the design thinking process they use within their app. One was just the Craigslist example was where they brought users to their app, they acquired the users, but this is one process which they use to convert them into customers and bring in more revenue. So in 2000, they struggled a lot. They didn't had money. They in fact even sold cereal boxes on the ground to just generate income to pay the salaries. So they weren't getting any bookings, and the users was not the platform was not very trustworthy because not many people knew about it, and they were not very sure of online booking at the time. And the regular OTAs, which is online travelers, travel platforms, aggregators, they were just had the major market share. And whenever someone new player comes, it's very difficult to get into the market. It was even more difficult in 2009. As of now, in 24, we can basically do with just better, more and more discounts and cashbacks, we can gain a small market share. But in 2009, it was way more difficult because uh, a lot of people were not online. Very few people were using these platforms, and very tech-savvy users, very heavy internet users who know where their way around the internet. So gaining their trust is very difficult because they think through a lot, right? So what Airbnb does is they wanted to understand why they're not getting the bookings. So founders stayed in different Airbnbs to understand both that kind of experiences, what their host faces while what the consumer faces while they're hosting a guest, and what a guest faces while they're residing in an Airbnb. So they wanted to do both kind of experiences. That's why they stayed in a lot of Airbnb listings themselves. They were there for a long time. And not just in one place or nearby their office. They stayed it all over the country. They went to different places, talk because that way they could understand different type of customers. At that time, they were in US, and as we know, let's say a customer from New York or a host from New York might be very different from a customer from California, from East Coast and West Coast, because there is a wide the cultural differences there. In fact, even in India, let's say a host from Kanyakumari might be very different from, let's say, a host in Kashmir, or let's say someone from Goa will be a person from Goa will be very different from a person from West Bengal in terms of behavior, how the rents, how the tenants are behaving in that area, how the renting experience is in that location. So how the people culture is there, everything is different. Let's say you just walk into any house with your shoes. In some areas, it's not even allowed. Nobody will say ki you have to you have to keep shoes outside if you want to enter the house. So the kind of food you can eat. Let's say some Airbnb host owners might not allow non-vegetarian food in their premises in India. So they have to understand each and every type of user. That's why that's how you can could create a filtering systems on the app so that they could give a more you can say appropriate listings for you. So they kind of experienced it everything themselves, right? If they wouldn't have done that, they would have just created random filters. User would find some mismatches when they went to different hosts. Their expectations would not be met, and that would be a bad experience. So they just went deep into it. They the other things they identified is the lack of trust and poor quality photos. So poor quality photos was also one of the reasons that people were not trusting, because the consumers were not able to understand whether this is a fake photo or not, whether it is what they're expecting or not. So poor quality photos was one of the other barriers they identified. So they designed a barrier around it. So they brainstormed on solutions like professional photography, and they offer free professional photos for their listing. So whenever you are onboarding them as an Airbnb host, they will offer free professional photography for you, because the more clearer the photos and you have, the more trust users will have, right? So they improve the profiles, provided as much information as they can, providing all do's and don'ts in the system, providing right kind of tags and filters for each property. So they went into as much detail as possible, which they understood from their initial experiment where they stay in the Airbnb listings. And once they implemented those changes, they saw an immediate increase in booking and trust levels, because now users have very clear information in terms of what they can expect. They have very clear information in terms of photography, about what kind of experience the users will have if they book an Airbnb. So all of these stuff helped a lot. Yeah. Now you all know Airbnb, it's a 100 billion company with around 4 million plus hosts worldwide. Yeah. And before we go into QA, There are one or two more examples which I want to share here. So I think a lot of you might have heard about MRI scans, right? You might have seen those machines for yourself or some relatives, and those look like very scary machines. You have to go into that machines and you don't know how much time you have to stay there, and kind of it becomes claustrophobic after a time, right? And imagine if that is happening with children. They cannot stay at one place for a very long time, right? So just imagine how scary a MRI machine would be for a children, right? So GE General Electric, as a company you might know, is one of the biggest companies which are into these kind of machines, all the healthcare or all the biggest type of electronic machines, right? So they identified these issues. They talked to their customers, childrens, and identify what the real problem is. And they built a very beautiful solution for MRI machines for their kids. What they did was they created those in shape of pirate ships, jungle safaris, and lot more. And it helped user. It gave those kids more like an adventure-like experience, and that reduces their anxiety. And the MRI success, the success of MRI scans were increased quite a bit, right? So it might not be a software example. Design thinking could be used in real world examples also. Or let's say there's a funny example of that. So during lockdown, I think a lot of you were a victim of productivity enhancements from the management. Like they wanted to track, because you all of you were working from home. They wanted to track your productivity. So a lot of people who thought were the traditional experiences or traditional processes, they built some interesting softwares. I think most of you hate it, which was they were tracking clicks, they were tracking scrolls or mouse movements, right? I think a lot of you hated it. In fact, most of you hated it, right? At the same time, the people who would think, because that is one process which nobody liked. There was no user value into it. I don't know how you can track something with productivity, just mouse click, and how good a product person with based on how much mouse they move. So the people who were focusing on design thinking piece process, people who were versed with design thinking, they came up with better solutions. They built the project takers where they could track project timelines, whether you're doing completing projects or time or tasks on time or not, which is a very simpler approach. It doesn't need a lot of technology like tracking everything on the go. Simple thing. Just whether you have been assigned this task, you have to complete it by this time. That's it. You are doing it or not, your project's time rate or completion rate is there or not. That's the best way to understand productivity, right? You're completing task or time or not. So that's the difference between, let's say, a traditional thinking and a design process thinking. And most of the users are okay with the design thinking wala solution, right? So yeah, so this initially you might not be able to identify a lot of difference because some of you do conduct user surveys and identify data across different channels. But it's just that the way you ask questions, it defines the design thinking process and how ready you are to go back to a previous stage and do the iteration again. It also identifies how um, the design thinking process works. Just remember, design thinking is about continuous learning, getting to know your customer better, keep practicing and innovating. That's what design thinking is. It's just change of mindset compared to a traditional management approach. That's it. It's not very complex thing where you have to learn a lot of things. Just keep practicing and learning. That's it. You will just develop it automatically.
Okay, great. Thank you for that wonderful session, Piyush. Like you said, everything's a continuous learning, right? Practice makes perfect.
Yeah.
1 second. I don't see any questions in the Q&A section yet. So, everyone, this would be the perfect time to, post your questions in the Q&A section here on Zoom. Until then, until we receive some questions, Piyush, I really want to thank you for delivering this wonderful session and giving us your time and your wonderful expertise, right? All the insights you have provided. Please accept this certificate of appreciation from
Sure.
the Institute.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
We have Sonakshi who has asked how to decide the quality of questions in the five whys.
So it's not just about the quality of questions. The previous questions, the each questions comes from the previous set of questions. Let's say, as I gave the example, like my laptop hangs, right? You have to ask a question why a laptop hangs. The next solution could you could explore it, ki why it's overheating. The next would be why it is overheating. It's just that you have to go one level down. It's not quality of questions. As I mentioned, you have to generate worst idea. So you can also ask the worst question. Doesn't matter. It should just make your understanding clear. Doesn't matter how worse the question is. If you could understand the consumer better by asking a silly question, do ask it. Right. So quality of questions can be improved by just experience, but otherwise there is no specific, you can say, framework for asking quality questions. You learn on the go. You can sometimes get the best insight from a very silly question.
Okay, thanks for that answer, Piyush. We have Vinaya who has asked, we can easily relate design thinking in B2C products. Can you elaborate the applicability of design thinking in B2B with an example?
Okay. So in B2B kind of thing, it depends what kind of application. B2B can be further expanded to B2B to C, and also just simple B2B. Uh, in B2B, it could be slightly simpler. Uh, the process is completely same. It's just the end consumer which is different. The in B2B, the questions could be more formalized or a more functional type of questions where you have to interview your client's employees instead of the direct user. The only difference is this: the type of questions will be different, and overall conversation flow would might be more formal, but overall there's not much difference in that, right? Okay.
We have Ganesh next, who has said this problem arises as the we are self part of the public. We are able to see what the general public needs, but the businesses are different in this part as we can't empathize without knowing what they're doing now in B2C versus B2B.
Yeah. So that's what design thinking is all. You have to without knowing what they're doing now. This is the exact problem which we're solving with design thinking. We're talking to customers in a more informal way. We are trying to understand them better. Right. In a formal way, you are collecting just user surveys or the users are filling out a feedback form or an NPS survey. In design thinking process, you are actually talking to them informally, asking a number of questions, maybe a more smart one or more the more silly one. But yeah, that's how it is. You have to know the customers. That's the core part of design thinking. If you're not doing that, you're not doing design thinking.
Of course. Thanks, Piyush. We
Yeah.
have Swati who has asked, is there a way to strengthen design thinking when the design team's maturity is low? She's asking this in regard for B2B data analytics and AI ML domain.
Okay. So as you mentioned, design thinking is more of a collaborative process. It's something where you discuss everything together and you come up with a refined idea. So the design thinking, instead of having their own perspective and designing things in their own way, now you have a refined, very refined idea and a very definite idea of what needs to be designed and how it needs to be designed. You have answered to all your questions, how user behaves in a certain way, how they be using the app. So you have very refined final you can say, idea to that. So that will reduce the risk of, let's say, of one of the team members or one of the weakest links. Let's say in this case, she mentioned was design team. Now they have a better approach. If they're not even designing, they don't even know what they are being, if they can't even design what they are being told to, both of it, then that's a different case completely. That there's those are not even good designers. But even if they cannot ideate a lot by themselves, but they can work on what has been clearly defined, that's good enough, right? So that solves the problem, the weakest link. Uh, the weakest link will always, you can say, weaken your team, but in design thinking, that risk is reduced quite a bit because there's a collaborative approach. Design and idea comes from everywhere, and everyone is on the same page of what needs to be built, what not should be built. So maturity level of that thing, or you can say understanding or perspective of your work, the whole process is completely aligned right now.
Thanks for that, Piyush. We have another question that is asking about what was your most recent project using the design thinking process and what problem did you solve?
Okay. We were building an internal dashboard for refund and return process. Uh, Till recently, uh, all the different departments were using different dashboards. Someone operations team were using order management systems to create or initiate returns. Then customer experience team were using Google Sheets and different payment aggregator screens directly to uh, refund the fees, right? And problem was one problem was basically everybody was just using different screens, so there was no clarity of data what they were doing. There were a lot of wrong refunds also, initiated returns, and nobody knows the whole system. When we started building the system, we understood from one team. We understood the process, how it is done. We started building it. Uh, Meanwhile, we were also talking to other teams on how we could improve the process. We are talking to customers, like how easy is the refund process for them. We got to know so much insights from that that we have to completely revamp the product. A lot of process changes in between. So the thing is, there was uh, the way we were thinking the process or a refund is initiated, the return process is initiated was completely different from what our team was actually doing. They were just working in silos. So we talked to all of them, built a solution uh, which was supposed to work, where we were brought everyone on the same page. Like finance was screaming about wrong returns. Um, CST was craving about they do not have enough data to return. They do not cannot provide timely refund if the ops team is not processing the returns timely. Ops team was craving about that we do not have complete customer information about uh, how they were using, how CS was approving returns, which customer should we give return to or not. We are giving returns to every random customer who just come up with very silly reasons. And then stakeholders were also uh, basically handing about they do not have a very clear solution on what's happening with the whole process. Our whole PNL was a mess because of that. So we talked to all of them differently once. Then we talked to them by making them sit together. We created a basic flow charts, showed it to them. Then took some ideas, feedback. We went back on the drawing board. We created wireframes. If whether it is this will be used. We again went back to them, showed them the wireframes. Then there were certain other feedbacks, how we can improve the things. Will this change the process or not? And this is with each iteration, we were designing from flowcharts to then wireframes, then went to high fidelity designs, and finally to the actual screens. We were iteratively testing it. collecting feedback from different set of users. We were talking to them consistently. And for the most important part, which is user centric, we were also talking to the customers at that point of time. Key, how do they understand the return process and how would they connect the customer team? What will their operational process will be for return? What would the return process be for them? How a lot of people were also complaining the with the delay in return refunds. So we understand the whole process from users, from different team members individually and also collectively. And then that's how we design the final process.
That was very interesting. Thank you for sharing, Piyush.
Yeah.
Our next question is, where is gamification not a suitable design idea?
Uh, it's a very simple thing. Gamification, for most of the people, gamification is just about adding leaderboards and point system, right? Uh, it's not just about design thinking. It's even in general, gamification is very much suitable where they provide more user value in terms of it brings competition and it brings motivation for the user to do something extra. Let's say leaderboard is one thing, but that's not the only key thing of gamification. Let's say one example is completing the profile on LinkedIn. You might have seen that your profile is 90% complete. It's similar on, let's say, LinkedIn, or let's say you go to a dating app like Hinge or Bumble or a matrimony app, Shadi.com, or any other, let's say, university application. In a lot of those websites where you have to build a detailed profile, or something like, say, you're looking for a job on iamjobs.com, you will see a profile completeness meter. That's also part of gamification. That's not a leaderboard, but that is giving you progress. That's called gamification. It is providing you a value. You have to understand that with design thinking, you have to understand that whether providing any motivation to the users give value to a user. Will, let's say, adding a profile completion rate will help a user profile on LinkedIn or a dating app. Let's say if you're just filling the profile 50%, will it be any difference than filling a profile at 100% rate, right? So if that user understands that part, they will fill in as much information they want. They will be motivated to take it to 100%. Like I'll want to fill my profile 100%. Or let's say something as simple as Dream 11. That's app is built completely on gamification. It's a game, but the process is gamification where you have complete leaderboards. You users clearly know that they have to be on top of the leaderboards to win more and more money. They have to be on, let's say, as much higher as possible on the leaderboard to give them more money. They have a tail point system with which will help them, let's say, provide insight on what we can do better in terms of choosing teams and all, right? So when it comes to gamification, users should also be understood key. If, let's say, a leaderboard board is shown, or a profile completeness, or any other kind of badges which are part of gamification, if that is shown to the user, if gamification is implemented, user should understand that piece. User should get motivated by this. So they have to talk to the users, whether in a certain website, badges motivate the user, or let's say profiles, completion of profiles. If they fill it, will it make the difference? Then you should understand that user should know about it or what user thinks about it. That's how you implement. If user thinks I have filled this information, that's more than enough. It's not your profile completion matter doesn't matter much. They won't fill it. So that gamification piece is useless, right? If the understanding of user is different, right? Yeah.
Thank you for that, Piyush. Um, we have Shikhar who has asked, if the product is based on an entirely new potential gap, is it good
Hmm.
if one uses the traditional method or uses design thinking at a very low level, in terms of basic research and low feedback rates?
No, it doesn't matter. In fact, I gave you one of the examples. Um, like Apple iPhone. It was a complete it was a completely new thing in the market. It was not an existing project. There was no such similar product, which I mentioned earlier. Microsoft had one, and one of the users mentioned about IBM also in the chat. So they were not present at that time. They were launched earlier, but they were not present at the time when Apple iPhone was launched. Right? When Apple was working on the iPhone, they did as much detailed testing as possible. They use the design thinking approach. What they can do. One of the example I gave was related to gestures, where they took those gestures from real world and implemented into the iPhone design. So it's more of a design thinking is more of a modern way of thinking where we could provide more user values. Uh, Traditional, it's in the name itself is more of a older approach where it was just you have a problem in mind and you have to find a solution for it. You have to for your business goals. Now, design thinking is an approach where you want to help out the users. In that way, you will have to choose design thinking process if user is your first priority. If you want to be successful in the long term, design thinking is the way to. So it doesn't matter if you're starting from scratch, there is no other example in the market. Design thinking is a good approach to start with. And as I mentioned earlier, it's a very, very simple approach. It's not very complex that will complicate things a lot. So yeah, you can start with design thinking as soon as, even if you're starting something very new.
Great, thanks, Piyush. We have Nitin next, who has shared that had Nitin had to kick off user research completely relying on secondary research rather than on primary use or research technique frameworks like design thinking. The
Uh,
result they ended up with was approximation of user needs rather than actual user needs. They did this due to limited avenues to reach out to potential customers. So, his question is if you have any tips to navigate such an environment and how to initiate outreach via surveys or user feedback for existing products.
um, there are several things to it. There might be cases. So in fact, a lot of companies still do use secondary research. They collect NPS and other user feedbacks, and that's it. They collect data from heat maps and Google Analytics, all of that. But a lot of companies which want to go into design thinking, there are also certain challenges which I think he's mentioning, which is they might have limited access to the users, which is completely fine. If you are not able to reach your users, you have to work with whatever you have. Limited approach. Um, you have to take the traditional approach only if you do not have access to any kind of customers you have. So secondary research is the only possible way. Second, I have seen in a lot of companies where the companies hesitate to reach out to the users. Or in fact, not just the companies, if we deep down, product managers do not want to talk to a customer directly. They just rely on it. It's more about the mindset. What will customers give information about? Will they talk to us properly or not? Doesn't matter. Just start cold calling customers and approach them on the streets. You have to be, you can say, I'll use a Hindi word here. You have to be a little besharam in that. You just have to go to approach the customer and just talk to them. There's no other way of approaching customers. Doesn't matter what customers will think. A lot of people will reject you. That's fine, but just talk to them. Some will respond to you positively. Some will give limited information. Some will give you detailed information, but you have to cold approach. People will heavily give, a lot of people, customers do give direct feedback in case they're not finding things good. But if the customer is happy, they might not give reviews. So what's to find out what's working? You know what's not working. You can see it in reviews. But to find out what's working, you have to talk to customers. Even if they give 5-star reviews, just talk to them. It doesn't mean that if they've given 5-star reviews, You can just ignore that customer ki, हाँ, he has bought it. Now no need to talk to him. He's a happy customer. You need to find out what's working.
Of course. Thanks, Piyush. We have Sonakshi who's asked, how do you utilize design thinking for enhancing post purchase experience, like you just said about?
Yeah, the similar thing which I mentioned above. Whenever a customer, whenever a customer buys something from us, we collect a shopping feedback. So that's, you can call it a secondary approach. But as I mentioned in the previous examples, we call me and the testing team and the other members of the product team do call customers based on the shopping feedback. We try call all types of customers, whether it is someone who has given a one out of 10 rating or someone who has given a 10-star rating. Doesn't matter. We just want to understand the consumer behavior. Then their customer experience team also. We want to understand the delivery experience. How was the delivery experience? What we can improve upon it. Then there is, this is something we call for immediately after delivery. And then there's a third calling we also do sometimes. We do it for only for few customers. Majority CS team does it. Is NPS calling. So after 21 days or 30 days, we send them an NPS rating uh, to fill, where they talk about the product experience overall, not just the delivery or the shopping feedback as earlier, overall packaging or the product they've used. We also call those customers, see how they're using the product. Are they facing any issues? Let's say we are selling a mattress. Are they finding the mattress very firm or very hard? Was it easy to uh, you can say uncompress? I'll give you one example I just realized recently later on, but more or less at every stage of thing like shopping feedback, then delivery experience, and also the NPS experience, we call customers and ask them their experience. Yeah. So before we proceed, if we take up any other questions, there's one more example which I'd like to show. It's not a software example, but in real life also, in physical product. And this is something we are working on right now. We have worked on 7 years ago, in fact. So whenever you go to market for buying a mattress, if someone has bought a mattress, you might have experienced that in a local store that you it's a very hassle process where once you selected the mattress, you have to, the logistics is very, very complex. You have to book a big rickshaw or a tempo to bring it to home. Then, if you're living on, let's say, a higher floor, then getting that mattress to your floor was very, very complex. Then, the mattress industry, in fact, we were the first ones to do that in India, and Casper was first to do that in US, or in fact, all over the world is the modern online mattress logistics, which is a compressed mattress. If you have anyone has ordered a mattress recently online, the mattress came in a very small box. It was completely compressed and rolled, right? So it made the logistics way, way easier. If someone has not thought of that, compressing and rolling the mattress in a very small box, this online D2C industry where I'm working would not have existed. The most of the mattress companies would still be traditional, selling via local shops, transporting mattresses via tempos, three-wheelers, or rickshaws, and taking it up on higher floors would be a mess. But glad someone thought about it, and that's how this D2C mattress industry is created. So that was one more example of the design thinking.
Thanks,
Yeah.
Piyush. Our next question is from Ganesh, who has asked how to handle design thinking approaches in an environment where the client is restrictive in terms of creative or also is not explicit.
Okay. So that becomes very, very challenging because the core of design thinking is human interaction and getting as much information from the user. So if the client is very, very restrictive, the design thinking would be very, very challenging to implement. But you have to try to implement it by just getting as much information from it as possible, even if it's very, very less. And no, so that's how it goes. But without the core of it, which is human interaction, design thinking would become very difficult in general.
Of course. We have a few more questions. Tita has asked if a product manager is set up in India and working with the counterparts from different parts of the world to solve a user pain point or build a product, how does the product manager empathize directly with the user who are in a different part of the world? Like, if direct face to face interviews or ethnography is not a choice, do surveys and telephonic discussions serve effective?
Yeah, telephonic discussion is part of design, human interaction only. It doesn't matter if you're seeing a face or not. A lot of times you can just do with telephonic interaction. Uh, Basically, the online interaction or the number of people which are online today, that has dissolved the boundaries for that, the geographical boundaries. You can connect to any person in USA and take a feedback on that. So there are a lot of tools like we are on one right now, Zoom or a Google Meet or any other tool. So those boundaries have dissolved a lot. So the geographical boundaries is not an issue. Yeah, cultural boundaries might be, but that's a very small problem, and you can learn with experience how they talk, how they behave, and all of that. Will they are they ready to give answers or not? So that's a very small solution, but there are no specific boundaries as of now. Word is one single market when it comes to software, digital products. Physical products might be different, but for digital products, there is one single market for the world.
Of course. Our next question is, can you help with how to apply design thinking to create prototype or mock up pages or even wireframes for an app or web page design?
Yeah, so wireframing or designing is just part of the design thinking only. It's just that with design thinking and traditional approach, what kind of wireframe or a prototype will come in as an outcome, right? Design thinking is just to help it improve. You will be creating wireframes, you will be creating prototypes in both the methods, even in tradition. It's just that you have to understand the problem better in design thinking, right? So that you can design it accordingly. In both the process, you have to create the same thing. It's just that the outcome would be very, very different. Where in design thinking, the problem would be more closer to the user. And if you are building something using a traditional method, it would be more like what what's going on in your mind, and also, but let's say you will take examples from somewhere around for similar apps or something. It would be more like that. But in design thinking, you will be designing because you know the problem very, very clearly. So you will be designing it accordingly, and probably the outcome would be far better than the traditional method. Otherwise, wireframing and prototyping is a common place in both traditional and the design thinking approach. It's a common stage.
Thanks for that, Piyush.
Mhm.
Our last question for the evening is, how often do you engage with customers to identify pain points? Is it a continuous process or do you hold back while solving an already identified pain point and then go back to re engage once a solution is released?
No, as I mentioned, design thinking is one process which is known for continuous feedback and continuous iterations. So you don't have to hold back in this. You have to be continuously taking feedback, continuously doing A/B tests, and continuously iterating that solution. So it's a design thinking is you have to think continuously. This is the process.
Okay, great. Oh, we've gotten a couple more
Yeah, yeah,
questions,
please proceed. No issues.
of course. Shikhar has asked, is there any limitation to design thinking in terms of not making a headache for the user?
No. So design thinking is something which you are using to help out the user in terms of you are building better solutions or easier solutions for them to approach. And if let's say a user is giving input in the while for that solution, they they might use it more because they know that this they might feel that this is something I wanted and I asked them to do it. They built this specifically for me. So this is uh, something you can say it's not more of a headache. It's more to reduce that headache kind of solution. It's just making life easier for the user and not for the business. So yeah, it helps resolve headache for the user.
Of course. Uh, we have Nitin, who has said that I've taken it with a pinch of salt that AI is here in today's world. Is talking to AI to understand users, their pain points, and potential solutions that is getting more and more adopted in the product landscape. What is your opinion, on this aspect of how AI is being used in product?
So AI at this stage of point of time, it's getting very, very advanced every few months. But the problem is it's more just of a solution. We are looking for a problem to solve because we already have a solution right now. So AI works on predefined set of models, and we are trying to build something with AI in few minutes, which is developed in, let's say, thousands of years in a human mind. So AI might be able to design a lot of things, but AI is not yet very creative. I don't know about the future. Maybe within 2 years, it could surpass a lot of human intelligence. Maybe within even in 20 years, it won't. So we cannot be sure of AI as of now. We have seen a lot of things where two AIs were talking to each other and they created their own language. And there were two bots where they created some very destructive capabilities to destroy humankind and all of that. But the thing is, that's still very, very limited. We will not see very Terminator kind of things in near future. But the thing is, the AI work as of at this point of time, good AI works when we get good prompt, and that good prompt comes from human mind. Right? AI can give better solutions if we define the problem as clearly as possible, and that's only what a human mind can do right now.
Correct.
And
That's
that's
even, yeah.
defining the problem clearly is design thinking.
Yeah. That's what Nitin has said too, that in his opinion, the human aspect cannot be substituted by AI.
As of now, that's completely agreeable. Human aspect cannot be replaced by AI. I completely agree with that statement. As I said, if every one of us would have same solutions, we would have been robots, not humans. Humans work on wide variety of things. They have, I don't know, the worst kind of ideas, the best kind of ideas. AI works on a fixed model as of now. They do not have unlimited possibilities. Maybe in the near future they can do that, but not as of now and a very foreseeable future. Maybe 10 years down the line, we will have a competing AI.
Yeah, of course. Only
And
time will
AI is
tell.
just for helping out the consumers here and not replacing the humans as of now, human workers.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, great. I think those are all the questions we have for today. So I think that brings up to an end for this session, right? Once again, Piyush, I want to thank you for delivering a wonderful session and, all these wonderful insights and also answering everyone's questions in depth and, helping everyone understand design thinking so much better. We really appreciate it.
Sure.
For
Thank you very much.
Shikhar has said, I think we can end with this. Thank you for your valuable insights. Piyush, what are your um, Tips for aspiring PMs and designers.
So just one thing. So design thinking is one approach you should definitely take up, and it's not something very for advanced PMs only. Beginners can also start working on that. But the most important thing is just don't build a bias in your mind. If you start working in an industry, or if you want to work in a specific industry, you read solutions about it online and you build your mind around it. So being a PM is about exploring all the possibilities, exploring all the ideas as much as you can, and do a lot of experimentation. That's it.
Of course. That's great advice. Thank you, Piyush. Thank you once
So
again for this wonderful session. And
thank
thank
you
you
very
to
much.
all our attendees also for joining us. I'm sure you've all had a fruitful time at this masterclass today.
Thank you guys. Thank you. Hope you enjoyed the session. See you around.
Thank you,
Thank
Piyush.
you.